Hey, hello, how you doing? My name is Tehja, and today is the start of spooky season on this channel. I'm going to try to do as many as possible, but I do have a great one for you, which I'm showing y'all how I'm making a just basic corset belt for my spooky season, which I'll be putting all of like the Halloween icons onto these corset belts and bedazzling the crap out of them. So that's pretty fun. I have one that will be posting tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But this video I will be showing you how I sewed the corset belt together. I may or may not have the pattern for this on my Patreon, but it'll only be one size for now, and then I'll update it so it could be multiple different sizes. And then it doesn't have to be for spooky season, it can be for anything, but it is a basic, nice, cute little corset belt so that if you have like a costume or not a costume and you want to do something real quick, this is something that you can do to save your Halloween season. So if you'd like to know how to sew your own corset belt, please keep on watching to the end of this video. So this is the pattern that I drafted myself, that I'll probably have available on my Patreon. I'll let y'all know down below. It's a lot I'm juggling right now, but this is the pattern I'll be using to make this corset belt. And then these are the fabrics I use. I use a typical black satin charmeuse fabric because it's a little bit thicker than other satins. And then for like the strength layer part, I'm using polyester twill fabric. So these are the pieces all cut out. I just saved y'all the pattern cutting clips and all that stuff and just went straight into it. So you should have 6 pieces or 12 pieces all together, one version in black satin and one version in the polyester twill. All right, so here I'm cutting out my fusible interfacing so that the satin fabric is a little bit thicker and a little bit stronger, because you know you need as much strength as you can get with corset belts or corsets in general. So what I'm doing, instead of typically I like to trace out the pattern pieces and cut it out, what I'm doing is I'm just pinning the satin pieces onto the fusible interfacing with the glue part touching the actual satin fabric and just cutting it out that way, because number one, it's easier to do instead of having to trace then cut, and number two is that everything's already like together, so all you gotta do is take the pins out and just iron the interfacing down once you're done. So it makes everything quicker. So I just do that real quick to all of the satin pattern pieces, and then I move on to the next step. So here I'm just quickly ironing the fusible interfacing onto the back of the satin fabric, and just to stiffen it up and just make it, you know, strong. And it's just, you use the iron without any steam at the setting. Oh no, you use it with steam. Yes, you use it with steam. It sticks better. Sorry, because with the fabric transfer, which you'll use in the next video, you use it without steam. But with fusible interfacing, you use with steam, and try to get not as hot as possible, but pretty hot, just to make sure that the fusible interfacing really sticks. So I fusible interfaced all of my satin pieces, and now what I'm doing is corresponding the satin pieces to its polyester twill, you know, counterpart, and pinning them together starting at the waist, and then I'm just going to pin wherever I feel is necessary so that I can base them together so they become one piece. Because for me, what I want to do is do like a faux single layer corset belt, but I needed like stronger fabric in order to do a single layer corset belt. So it's technically 2 layers, but I'm going to make the 2 layers into 1 layer by basting the layers together, the satin and twill pattern pieces together, just to make it easier and stronger, and just making sure that the integrity holds, because I do have a little bit of waist reduction in this corset belt, just because the silhouette just looks a little bit better than it just being flat, because I did have a corset belt, which y'all will see for the jigsaw corset belt if I get it done, hopefully soon, but it was just a little too flat for me. It was a little, you know, especially for what it's supposed to be. So anyway, I'll show y'all how I pin all the pieces together and how I base them together real quick, and then we'll move on to the actual sewing process. But this took a hot minute to do. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it took a hot minute to do, but I wanted to be as accurate as possible without the stress of it, you know, because you don't want to stress yourself out, but as accurate as possible, you know, just to make sure that things line up the way that they're supposed to. So, but you can completely skip this step if you want to and just wing it you know, that always, well, sometimes works if you want, you know. But for me, I wanted to be a good seamstress this time. So these are all the pieces combined into one piece. So I'm going to quickly baste the pieces on like the sides of the pieces, because the side seams are the most important. And I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll pin everything together. So this is what a piece looks like after I basted the pieces together into one piece. It's technically called flatlining. I'm usually not good at it. I want to be better at it, but I always have some type of bubbling or some type of unnecessariness that the fit isn't as good as it should be. It's not acting as one piece the way it should be, but it's good enough. It didn't affect the fit too much, or I don't think really at all by the time I was done sewing everything. So it is what it is, but that's the technical term for it. And unfortunately it's necessary in some instances. But anyway, moving on, as you see, I am pinning the pieces finally together so we can start to sew. But I'm first pinning at the waist, as always. For most corset pieces that you're making, you should always pin at the waist first, because that's the most important part of any corset. And then you pin up and down the side seams until, you know, they're pieced together, and you repeat that for all 6 pieces until it starts to resemble a corset belt. So this is what the corset belt looks like once everything is all pinned together, and I will be sewing at 1 inch because I'll be using the seams as boning channels as well. So that's why the seam allowance is so big. So I'll be sewing at 1 inch on my sewing machine with a straight stitch for all of the seams. So now that I've sewn all of the seams and it's looking good, I also did a zigzag stitch along the raw edges of all the seams as well, for 2 reasons: to combine the 2 pieces together once I take the basting out, which that's what I'm doing now, is taking the basting out, and also just to kind of reduce the fraying as much as possible, because these both polyester twill and satin are very fray-y type of fabric. So anyway, like I said, I'm taking out the basting stitches now. And then what I'm doing is I'm finishing the raw edges by folding it back like 1/8 of an inch and pinning, because I'll be sewing that down on the sewing machine first before I make my boning channels. It looks the best inside, and I don't know, it looks right, it feels right, and it's not really that hard to sew, and it also acts as a sewing guide for when we sew the boning channel down. So I'm going to do that real quick. It's a little tedious to do. You don't have to pin it. You can just wing it on the sewing machine and it should really be fine, and just guide the fabric the way you need it to go. But yeah, I like to pin it because, again, trying to be a good seamstress. So here I'm sewing that fold on my sewing machine with a straight stitch, just securing it down as best as possible. There's no like seam allowance per se, but it's just as long as a straight stitch goes along that folded area, that's fine. So that's what it looks like once I sew the raw edges down to make them nice and neat. So what I'm doing now is just pinning these side seams down, you know, separated or pressed down. If you want to iron it, you can iron it. It's actually a good idea. And I am just pinning the side seams or the seam allowance down so that it can then like I said, act as the boning channels. And then for the center back seams, what I'm doing is folding it in a like 3/4 of an inch ish, kind of 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, maybe 5/8 of an inch, but enough that you know your boning can fit through it once you sew it down. And I'm just pinning that as well, and that should be all of our boning channels. Now I do gotta say that oh, actually, I'll let y'all know once I start sewing, because I got something else to explain afterwards. That's what it looks like once I pinned everything down. Actually, because the thing is, it's better just to sew it. I don't even know why I pinned it, but it's good for educational purposes. But I'm going to sew everything down right on top of the stitch line of when I folded the raw edges down. Because it ends up being like the right distance away from the seam for the boning to fit for what I use. So anyway, what I wanted to say was that I also added a boning channel like a 1/4 of an inch away from the seam from the center back as well, which y'all don't get to see that, but I just use like regular ribbon for that. And you know, because that helps with making sure the grommets are in place. So anyway, this is what it looks like once all the boning channels are sewn, and now it's really starting to look like a corset belt, which is looking really, really good. So what I'm going to do now, real quick, just housekeeping of just cutting off the excess fabric, seam allowances, threads, all that stuff, frays, all that stuff, just to make sure it's as clean as possible and that nothing like gets in the way when we continue to construct the corset belt. So now it's time to bind the bottom edge of the corset belt. I believe it's the bottom edge. I'm not sure, but I think so. But I'm using a 1.5 inch wide black satin ribbon as my binding, because it's so easy. Instead of cutting strips of the original fabric, I will have to do that for other stuff. But but if you can use ribbon instead, I suggest you doing so. So what I'm doing is I'm pinning it along the raw edge of the bottom of the corset belt, making sure there's a little excess before you pin it, a little excess length on it, so that you can fold the raw edge of the length of the ribbon as well. But anyway, I'm just aligning the ribbon to the raw edge, pinning it down, and then I will be sewing at 1/4 of an inch to attach the ribbon to the corset belt. So you can see here where I cut, I just leave a little excess on each side just to make sure that there's enough to fold in the raw edges once the binding is done. So as you see, that's what it looks like once you pin everything down. And now I am sewing at 1/4 of an inch. Sewing the points is a little hard to do. So just do as best as you can. Just do as best as you can. It's a little hard to do, but once you figure it out, or at least get it good enough, then it's fine. So what I'm doing here is just cutting that seam allowance in half, because it's easier to fold the binding over when the seam allowance is a little bit shorter. As you see, I'm also watching the Scream movies on my iPad while I'm making a Scream corset belt. But anyway, yeah. Was there anything else? Oh, also, I suggest that you start sewing the binding on the wrong side of the corset belt, because it's easier, because you want to end up sewing or finishing the binding on the right side, because it's easier and you can make sure that the binding looks good. I did it reverse and I regret it. So anyway, now what I'm doing is folding over the ribbon so that it can complete the binding, making sure that the edge of the ribbon is tucked into the middle of kind of like that ribbon sandwich. So it's like a double rolled hem or something like that. It's kind of hard to explain, but like roll it like a burrito, like just roll it until you can't see the raw edges and it's just ribbon. If that makes any sense, but you can see what I'm doing. And you know, kind of pick up the technique. If you have any questions, of course, you can leave them down in the comments down below, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. So I'm going to do that along the whole length of the corset, and then sew from the top side or from the right side of the corset belt, and sew that down probably like a 1/16 of an inch away from the seam of the binding, or just whatever looks aesthetically pleasing to you, whether it's 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, whatever, as long as you can just secure the binding down. That's the most important. So here I'm sewing the binding down, and then there's just a couple of steps after that. What I don't show you, because I'm trying to get this corset belt done as soon as possible, is that with the excess ribbon, what I do is just I fold it into the wrong edge of the corset belt and just sew it down real quick. So anyway, here, what is it? Oh, I'm doing boning. So I'm taking my synthetic 1/4 inch boning and I'm measuring them out and just making sure that it's a 1/2 inch shorter than the boning channel. And then here I am making the top edge of the boning for the center of the corset belt diagonal and then curving the point a little bit just so it's not as sharp so it doesn't poke through the fabric, and sliding that right in. And I'm going to repeat the process of cutting the boning, rounding out the edges so that they're not super sharp, and just sliding it in over and over again. This part of corset making is very, very, very satisfying for me. I don't know why, but I'll just let this part play so y'all can enjoy it. And then after I put in all of the boning, then I will do the bottom edge, or the top edge binding, not bottom edge, we already did the bottom, the top edge binding to complete at least the sewing part of the corset belt. Alright, so I put all the boning in and I'm showing you that I pinned the binding on it. I'm showing you, see that I did it on the wrong side of the corset belt. So it's just a little bit easier to do. So that's how you're supposed to start off the binding, at least in my book. So I'm sewing that down, and then once that's complete, I am punching holes in the center back of the corset belt, right past the back boning, center back boning of the corset belt, because I stitched another line from the boning seam, another 1/4 inch to act as a guide, to be kind of like my grommet panel, if that makes any sense. If you've seen other corset videos, you know what I mean. And so I'm poking like 5 holes for the corset belt, and that's where the grommets, or what I'm technically using, are eyelets, but they are literally almost the same thing. They're like sisters. So I'm doing that real quick. And the hole puncher is literally the best investment I made in my corset making career. it literally makes it so easy. So these are the eyelets I'm making. I use these for the Playboy bunny suit video, which I'll link that down below and somewhere here. And I'm using the red ones here. I used the black ones in that video, but I'm using the red ones here for the obvious. It's Halloween. It's Ghostface from Scream. So, you know, it matches the vibe, it matches the theme. So I'm just putting those in, and then after that's done, that's literally it. So here's the final product of the corset belt. This is what it looks like. It looks really, really, really good. I'm very happy with how it came out, and it's just and like, you know, the pattern, I'm still tweaking it and working on it you know, as I go along, but I'm happy with what it looks like. So next video I will be rhinestoning the crap out of this corset belt naturally, so stay tuned for that. That's what it looks like with me trying it on. And yes, so stay tuned for that, and stay spooky, and there's more Halloween stuff, so stay tuned for tomorrow probably tomorrow for the rhinestoning video. Anyway, lovelies, as always, I love you, love yourself, and I will see you next video. Mwah!